I would move away from all of this paper stuff. I would be like, you know what? We're going virtual. We're going online. We are using the internet. We are moving into the 21st century on all of these things that we really don't need to be doing paper stuff on. So moving away like a plan and a strategy. We're going to be done with paper filings by this date, and we're going to shorten it even more than that date. I would move to remote interviews. I think that in terms of like visa interviews overseas, having everyone go to the embassy is crazy. I would tell them, you guys need to get remote interviews.
Welcome to Immigration and Mobility Decoded, a podcast about global immigration and mobility. It is Tuesday, March 28th. Hope everyone had a great weekend and you are enjoying this final week of March. In today's episode, you'll hear our conversation with Chris Richardson, General Counsel and Chief Operating Officer at BDV Solutions. Super excited for everyone to hear that conversation, but before we get there, if you're watching on YouTube, definitely would appreciate you liking this video as well as subscribing to our channel. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, definitely would appreciate a follow. And now I'd like to welcome Chris Richardson, General Counsel and Chief Operating Officer at BDV Solutions, to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. Chris, so excited for you to join us on this episode. How are things going?
Everything's going really, really well. Thank you for having me.
And you're still in South Carolina, right?
Yes, that's right.
How are things this time of the year? That the awkward, almost spring but not quite part of it.
Yeah, the thing about South Carolina is you just never know what you're going to get. Every day, one day it's like really freezing, the next day it's really beautiful, and then sometimes you just get something in between. So you just never really know with South Carolina.
Kind of sounds like Chicago this time of the year as well. It's freezing one day, and today it's about 50 degrees, so you just never know. And you're a native of South Carolina, is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. I was born and raised in Charleston. I lived my first 18 years there and decided I wanted to get as far away from South Carolina as possible. Traveled, saw the world, and realized that I was missing a lot back home. So
Yeah.
I came back.
Well, speaking of traveling, we'll get to there in a second because you've been to some very interesting spots. Um, but for those who are just unfamiliar with you, can you talk a little bit more about your role at BDV and just BDV Solutions in general?
Sure. So BDV Solutions, Boy, David, Victor, because they're like the three worst letters you could have together for a name. Boy, David, Victor Solutions. We are a labor solution company, and what we do is we match employers with entry-level jobs in franchises like McDonald's, Taco Bell, Wendy's, but also with manufacturing companies, pet product stores. We do a little bit of everything. So but we basically match them and use the immigration system, this specifically this particular type of visa called the EB3 unskilled visa. We bring employees to those companies, and we kind of help both sides navigate the system, the immigration system.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And when you're not at BDV, when you're not in the office, what do you like to do outside of work?
Oh, I like kayaking. I like riding my bike around. I like walks in the park, or on nature trails. I do like a little bit of fishing, but mostly something near the water. I like the water.
There you go. That's awesome. So, Chris, a couple seconds ago, you mentioned you've traveled quite a bit around the world, and for those listeners who aren't familiar with you, you used to be a U.S. diplomat and worked in the State Department. Is that correct?
That's right. That is correct. I was a U.S. diplomat for about 8 years.
How did you pursue that career path?
So it's very random, actually. I started off. I went to Emory undergrad. And I remember reading about and writing a lot about the Foreign Service and the State Department and being kind of interested in it, but it really wasn't something I wanted to do. And then I went to law school, went through law school, started practicing law, and about 2 or 3 years into practicing law, I remember there was this partner in the office next to my office. He'd been practicing for about 50 years, and he came by my office and he said, "You know, son, I've been in this office for 50 years, and you're going to be in the office for 50 years too, and it's going to be great. And I looked at that guy and I was like, oh, no, 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 no. Chris Richardson's not going to be in anybody's office for 50 years. So I took the Foreign Service exam probably as soon as that next day I registered. I took the exam and I just bounced, passed, and then decided to do something completely different and completely the opposite.
Awesome. Uh, and in your time as a in the State Department, where have you traveled? What countries have you lived in?
I lived in my first tour was in Nigeria. I did 2 years there in Lagos, and then from Lagos I went over to Nicaragua. I lived in Managua for 2 years, and then Pakistan for some time. And then my last tour was in Madrid, Spain. And I love Spain. It was a great country.
That's awesome. What which one would, if you had to rank them, and if you had a favorite?
Oh, I think countries are like children. You don't really rank or pick one or the other. They all have their strengths and their weaknesses, and they all have the good things about them and the bad things about them. And I mean that genuinely.
Mm.
I think most people are, oh, Spain must have been your favorite country. But I'll tell you that, the people in Nicaragua and Nigeria and Pakistan were a lot more open and a lot more warm, right? I didn't, I assumed when I went from Nicaragua to Spain that Spaniards would be just as warm and gregarious and open as the people in Nicaragua, but that wasn't the case at all. Latin America is very different. Spain's a very European country at the end of the day. And so, I found the people in Spain not to be particularly warm, unless you got to know them and really got to, interact. Whereas I never really had that problem in the other countries I lived in. And so, there are things about Spain that I absolutely love, but there are things I didn't like. And that was true of every, and the work, honestly, Spain was really relaxing, really nice, but the work was much more challenging in the other countries. And when you join the State Department and you become a U.S. diplomat, you want to do it to really help your country. And I always felt that in some ways, I was able to help my country more in some of the other countries I served in. Even being a junior diplomat versus in Spain, where even as a more senior diplomat, I don't think I was able to. My voice wasn't as far-reaching as it was in those other countries.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. Really appreciate it. And now let's hop into our main conversation today, starting with visa wait times. Finn, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, just set the stage here a little bit. I mean, we're recording this at the end of March, marking almost the 3-year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic, and when a lot of U.S. consulates overseas shut down in response to that pandemic. And Chris, as you well know, that caused a lot of havoc
Mhm.
in generally across the world. The pandemic, of course, caused a lot of havoc, but it caused a lot of havoc for folks who needed to get interviews in order to obtain a visa, come to the U.S., return to the U.S. from abroad. And there's been reporting as of late that visa wait times are still very, very long, up to 90 or more days to get an appointment in many of the busier consulates overseas. Can you unpack what's been going on there and how consulates are cleaning up the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. I think that it's a confluence of events that really hurt consular quite a bit. First, you had the Trump administration, which enacted about 400 immigration changes, but had a hiring freeze, and not just a hiring freeze, but hundreds of officers, predominantly visa officers, left the State Department, right? And so you just had less embassies even open and functioning. So that was one. And then COVID happened, and because consular is fee generating or fee based, no one was applying for visas, and so they didn't have any money to operate, and therefore they shut down and atrophied even further. And then on top of that, just at that time under the prior administration, just a sense of not even liking consular or liking the State Department, and really not wanting to even issue visas. And so, the State Department and consular affairs are like a well-running engine, and if you starve it of oil, it's not that even if you put in oil immediately, doesn't mean it's automatically going to start back up. You know, those things just take time. And so, unfortunately, the world is reopened faster than Consular has been able to. And even if you read some of like the budget cables that the State Department has put out, you know, they don't anticipate being back to normal until 10 years after COVID. And so we might not see things back to normal until 2027, 2028 at this rate. You know, I do commend Consular for taking really strong steps, um, allowing for more, you know, interview waivers, looking at doing domestic visa processing, the extension of the F1 student visa timeframe to 1 year you can apply before your actual visa needs to be issued. So the State Department is taking a lot of steps, but you know it's really far down the hole, and I think that's why we're seeing these huge wait times. It's just because the State Department hasn't been able to keep up with the changing of the times, and they just don't have the money for it as of yet.
And at BDV, you help folks navigate these consular delays all the time. We do at Envoy as well with our customers. What for employees and employers who may be stuck and be held back by these visa wait times? What are their options? How do they navigate this situation as it currently stands?
You know, when folks ask me about it, I tell them, first, is it an actual emergency? Do they actually need to travel to the U.S.? That should be the first question, because I think that a lot of the emergency request line is clogged up by people who don't necessarily have emergencies, and they're actually taking away from people who do have emergencies. So, you know, if it's not someone who's hiking wants to hike in Colorado or something, and they actually have a genuine need to travel, once you've established that as a baseline, then you need to think about, well, how am I going to reach out to this embassy? What are the ways to do this? One, you'll need to request an expedite appointment, which you can do through the State Department consular website. But two, you know, you might want to approach your congressman or your U.S. senator and ask them to also put in that request on your behalf. You really need to push in, you know, 2 or 3 ways to try to get the embassy moving on it. And it might work sometimes, and it might not. But that's going to be the thing, is like you have to have a strategy on how are you going to get these visas moving.
Chris, I'm curious. Finn mentioned that some of the wait times are upwards of 90 days, depending on the country, even longer. Are there risks to the U.S. because of these long wait times, visa wait times?
You know, I think the risk is primarily based on just what America's places in the world. Well, obviously, the most practical cost is to our like universities and our businesses and people who are looking to get their loved ones to return to the U.S. or to be united with their loved ones. But you know, universities, if they can't get their students, international students, you know, that's a huge cut to their budgets. Companies, it's a huge cut to their ability to foster economic growth. But you know, in the larger term, in the larger scale for our country, it really is pushing people away from the U.S., right? If you have an immigration system that's non-functioning, if you have an immigration system that doesn't work for people anymore, well, companies are going to find a different way, right? They're either going to offshore or nearshore the work. They're going to encourage their people to use Zoom and stay abroad. And the long-term effects is that hurts us as a country, right? If you know a bright and talented person can build a Google or build a Tesla, or build a Facebook or help build a Facebook, you know, we want those people in our country. And I think that the cost to us, you know, practically is bad, but just philosophically and looking at where our country is going, we don't want Tesla to be founded in these other countries. You know, as Americans, we want these things to be in our country, and it really isn't. It's about, what does America stand for? What are our values as a country? And I think having an open, honest immigration system that's functioning and that can navigate and help people get their visas and separate out the people who shouldn't get their visas in a fast way, that should be the hallmark of who we are. And I fear that these long visa wait times, these long backlogs, are harming us as a nation and really, when we bring someone overseas, it really is an investment, not just in that person, but that person, therefore, in turn, invests in America. And in 20 or 30 years, we see the fruits of that labor. My fear is that we're not investing in these people, we're pushing them off. And so Canada is going to be the place where the next Tesla gets founded. India or UK is the next place where the next big companies will be founded and come from. And we as Americans have to confront that and think about how our immigration system is helping these other countries invest in themselves to our own detriment.
So how can the government get, I guess, first part, what should the visa wait times be, and how can the government get back to those wait times?
Well, I think that, for tourist visas and F1 visas, but especially the tourist visas, the wait time shouldn't be any more than like a week, at most a week, maybe 48. Back when, even when I was in the State Department, some places had 48-hour wait times for visa interviews. And the reality is that's what it should be. I think that the things that we would need to do, the State Department just aren't willing to do. Right? We need to look at doing remote interviews, for example. Why everybody and their mom has to go to the U.S. Embassy to do a visa interview is beyond me, right? I think we live in a remote Zoom world, and having in-person interviews in a paper system in a remote world just demonstrates to visa applicants just how backwards we are and how little we care even about our immigrants, right? The fact that we're not willing to invest in technology and not willing to move forward and progress into the 21st century on this stuff really is a demonstration of how little we care about immigration. And so, one, we really need to hone in on using remote interviews if we have to have interviews at all, waiving much larger classes of visas, and really focusing, or even like within countries, having officers travel remotely around the country to issue visas, really investing in domestic visa renewal so people don't have to go back out of their home country, leave the United States to renew their visa, have them renew their visa here in this country. And so I don't think that there's one solution. I don't think that there's like one immigration plan. What we need is an immigration strategy, and that strategy built around how do we harness the technology of today to ensure that we are building the fruits and being able to establish the seeds that'll progress for tomorrow.
Yeah, and Chris, one thing you mentioned that I wanted to follow up on, because I imagine there are a lot of folks in our audience who aren't aware of this, but you mentioned that U.S. State Department, the consular division, is completely fee funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So unlike the Department of Defense, where the taxpayers pay the bill, the expenses for them, and Congress allocates them the money,
Mm-hmm.
the State Department is almost entirely funded from fees for immigration applications.
Right.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that there's maybe ways, in order to improve these visa processing times, there are ways that the State Department could modernize, in a sense,
Right.
to cut back on administrative costs. And yeah.
Right. Or even looking at, so within the State Department, there's lots and lots of different types of departments. And even so there's five cones, really. Five cones that are at the top of the State Department. Consular, which does the visas and American Citizen Services, political, public diplomacy, economics, and management, the people who manage the embassy, right? So four of those cones actually answer directly to the State Secretary of State. Consular doesn't even answer to the Secretary of State. They're below that, right? They're on board with like the Bureau of Oceanography or something at the State Department. And to me, it's crazy that something as important and critical and vital to U.S. diplomacy as the security of American citizens and our visa operations doesn't actually even answer to the Secretary of State. And so that also demonstrates just how little care we have about our visa policy, that our visa policy isn't something the Secretary of State has to actually talk to someone directly about. And so what I would do is I'm shocked that no congressperson has thought about this. They need to write a bill to make consular directly answer to the Secretary of State, because that'll elevate its importance within the State Department, and the State Department itself will, I think, then will take it a lot more seriously. But if it's like a third or fourth, and consular likes it that way, I think consular likes the fact that they don't have to answer to the secretary, and that they are like a little bit further down the totem pole because they don't have to answer these questions. But if you have it at the secretary level, or making them answer directly to the Secretary of State, that the person who's in charge of consular, it becomes a whole different ballgame within the State Department in terms of where the priorities lie for it.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful, and I think our audience will get a lot of gain out of that. Pivoting from one government agency to another, Chris, you penned an op-ed in The Hill not too long ago titled, "Is the Department of Labor Fueling Our Labor Shortage?" We recently conducted Envoy's Immigration Trends Survey, surveyed 500 HRs from across the country specializing in global mobility and corporate immigration. And we gave them the three government agencies that deal most with immigration, Department of Labor, USCIS, and Department of State, and asked which is the primary barrier to you for hiring foreign talent, sponsoring foreign national employees. And the Department of Labor was the resounding winner, if you want to call it that, of that question. 61% of employers say the Department of Labor is the primary barrier. Can you unpack why that is and maybe explain what you were speaking about in that op-ed as well?
Yeah. So, I think that every other department in the U.S. government that manages immigration, whether it be the State Department or USCIS or Department of Homeland Security, has really tried on immigration to find solutions, have really tried to work on this issue. The Department of Labor has been an outlier in the U.S. government. They just don't seem to care about the fact that their wait times are incredibly long, that things that used to be 4 months are now taking 11 or 12 months. And as much as businesses are screaming, they're just like, they just don't seem to care about it. I think that the reason why they're back, they have a lot of the same problems that Consular and USCIS do in terms of, lack of attention during the last administration, and actually this administration as well, and COVID-19. But I think that the critical difference is that everything there is free, right? And so they're not fee generated. They get their money from the government. And what they probably need is a combination of both, right? They need to be able to charge employers for an entry level to even do some of these services. And I think employers would pay to get these things done, but they also need intense leadership from the top of DOL to really focus on the immigration specter, right? Because as busy as the State Department is and as busy as Department of Homeland Security is, DOL is super, super busy, right? And so if you ask the average DOL person, well, what do you care about? They're going to be like, well, wage and hour, the things that they really focus on and work on. And the immigration stuff is sort of the redheaded stepchild of their department. And so what I think is you need like the congresspersons, again, when the hearings come up for the new nominee, they really need to focus and hone in on this immigration question and see what the new nominee is going to do on immigration.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that before I hand it back to Eric, but any optimism on the new nominee and what they may be able to bring in to fix some of these long wait times for immigration applications with DOL?
One hopes that they will work on it. One hopes that they will come forward on it. But I just don't think that the people who run DOL, political or career people, it's just not a priority for them. And I think until business comes along and tells them, no, actually, this needs to be your priority, we're not going to see more done on it. And I think that is my fear, is that irrespective of who they appoint, and irrespective of who they nominate, there just isn't a priority for it because they really care about wage and hour, and they really care about, their priorities are just different than helping U.S. businesses navigate the immigration system.
So, Chris, on the topics of the visa wait times, the DOL, State Department, you've mentioned one common theme of how to fix things involves Congress. Mm-hmm. And I think the three of us know, current political landscape. Things look a little bit murky when it comes from immigration legislation from Congress. Mm-hmm. It was difficult before, probably even more difficult now, looking at the split in the House and the Senate and the White House. In the next year, 2 years, do you realistically think we'll see any movement on immigration legislation?
No. I think that unfortunately immigration isn't. So I think that there's consensus around 80% of immigration and what's going on in immigration. I think that other 20% is what the holdup is. That other 20% is what we're seeing the conflicts over. And unfortunately, and I've talked to congressmen and women before about this, nobody wants to give away 80% of what they agree on because they want to negotiate and fight over that 20%. And I think that 20% of issues is what's going to stop us from ever seeing, immigration reform. And unfortunately, I think there's this view among immigration attorneys and people who care about immigration is that, well, if the economy gets bad enough, if our labor shortages get bad enough, that will spur people to act. And there are a lot of decisions that America has made in its history where the economics, it doesn't, is irrespective of the economics, right? Like, you know, even immigration itself, even when it was profitable and helpful for businesses and helpful for all Americans, doesn't always match Americans' views and values on immigration, right? I wrote a book about the civil rights movement, and segregation is like the most like illogical. From an economic standpoint, segregation made no sense, but people's vibrancy and heart and their prejudices and feelings on things a lot of times will overcome the facts and overcome even the necessity to do something. And I think, unfortunately, on immigration, it really has become this third rail of American politics. And it really is really wrapped up in a lot of emotion because it's such a complex issue that you can kind of boil it down to whatever side you want. And I think that that is what the conflict is and why it's going to be hard to see any kind of immigration reform.
Yeah, definitely. So lack of reform, and is like you said, a couple minutes ago you mentioned that the consulates were affected by the Trump administration. Curious if you can explain to our audience just the level of how much power does the executive branch have when setting the immigration agenda?
I think that during the Obama administration and the George W. administration and the Clinton administration, the executive probably had a lot more leeway to do like a DACA, for example, and a lot more leeway to do executive orders. But now I think that Biden, the thing is that the last administration during Trump, a lot of the things that he tried, Democrats and progressives or the left or whatever you call them, they went to court over a lot of things. And that in turn taught conservatives or people on the right, oh, well, we could do this too. When our administration is gone, we're going to do the same thing. And that's precisely what you're seeing. And so, because the prior administration was so polarizing, and this one is also polarizing, the things that they probably would have done during the Obama administration on immigration or even before that, I just don't think you're going to see as much of that now because I think that not only are there more likely for lawsuits, but I think those lawsuits are much more likely to be successful because of the current conservative tilt of the all the courts.
Right, right. So curious to hear your thoughts and words of wisdom you might have for employers and employees. Obviously Trump administration, now we have the Biden administration, 2024 is coming up. What words of wisdom do you have for employers and employees to just navigate certain levels of uncertainty, going from administration to administration, and agencies are setting different agendas, et cetera?
I would tell any employer to, think about the employees that you've worked with that have been immigrants and how they've contributed, and always keep them in the back of your head when you're going through a lot of this stuff because it's just difficult. The whole immigration system is broken. We don't have the sense among our leaders in Congress and the White House that this is a priority for them. And so we're not seeing the kind of leadership. So one, keep those people in mind. But two, don't sit there and just complain about it, or certainly don't come to the lawyers or the consultants and say, hey, what's going on? Ask them what you can do to help, right? Every employer has a right to talk to their congressperson about this stuff. Talk to them about it. Every employer has that right to talk to their leaders and demand more from them for this stuff. And so I encourage you, if you are an employer and you're frustrated by DOL, you're frustrated by Department of Homeland Security, don't just be frustrated. You need to be calling these Congress people and telling them, hey, this is what I'm seeing. because otherwise the only persons that these Congress people hear from are people on the extreme right or the extreme left. They don't hear from people in the middle who don't have a political agenda with this stuff, but just want to get their workers. And they don't hear from the people in the businesses that are really suffering these labor shortages. They do hear from them, but they don't necessarily hear from them from the angle of you guys need to fix immigration. And I think that that's what they need to do. If you're an employer and you're frustrated, you need to be on the phone making these calls to your leaders and representatives and telling them that they need to get off their butts and get to work for you. Because at the end of the day, when you think about what is our country, right? Our country isn't ruled by one party or another party. It's our government is run on the consent of the governor of us, right? Like, so we are the ones that have to give them the power to to do the things that we know are necessary and right. And these Congress people, they know what needs to be done. They just don't have the courage to do it. They don't have the courage to go in there and work hard and be willing to lose on this immigration issue because they're all terrified. And I think that if you're a business person and you are fed up with this, you need to talk to the people that we vote for to get them moving on it.
Because you summarized the climate in Congress really well, and I just want to take it back to the executive branch because, whether right or wrong, again, back to our immigration trend survey, most employers who we surveyed said that they expect the executive branch to make the changes that they need. Today, if you're czar of U.S. immigration, employment-based immigration, what's one simple change you would make at the agency level to improve the process?
Oh my goodness. I would move away from all of this paper stuff. I would be like, you know what? We're going virtual. We're going online. We are using the internet. We are moving into the 21st century on all of these things that we really don't need to be doing paper stuff on. So moving away like a plan and a strategy. We're going to be done with paper filings by this date, and we're going to shorten it even more than that date. I would move to remote interviews. I think that in terms of like visa interviews overseas, having everyone go to an embassy is crazy. I would tell them, you guys need to get remote interviews. On the DOL side, I would focus on making the labor certification form a lot simpler, more compact. I would focus on getting prevailing wages back in a faster period of time and not just sitting on those, just automatically approving those. I would probably move the entire DOL immigration operation away from the way it is now, but to more the way it should have been or the way it was founded to be. When DOL's immigration apparatus was founded, it was really founded to be like the IRS, in which they would only audit the most extreme of cases and they would do so randomly. Now, virtually everyone gets an audit or a denial or issues. And I don't think that immigration, the DOL side of that was founded to be that way. And so for DOL, I would just return to the roots of what it was originally built to be around. And I think that those are some of the changes that, look, the administration can do a lot on immigration. They can really harness and really focus in on improvements for businesses, especially. But I do think that it's not as easy as waving a wand anymore. And I do think that no matter what the administration does in immigration, they're going to be challenged. And unfortunately for us, because they know they're going to be challenged, a lot of times they don't want to step up and do anything.
I think you'd be a very popular immigration czar with those improvements. I did want to ask you as a follow-up, do you think it's a weakness that the responsibilities around processing immigration applications are distributed across so many agencies? We've listed them off here: Department of Labor, U.S. Department of State, USCIS, CBP we haven't mentioned. There's other immigration agencies as well. Is that a weakness, or do you think that system can work better?
I think that system can work. It just has to work better. I know that there was talk after 9/11 of moving a lot of the consular functions to DHS, but I think that consular has a role in immigration. The State Department has a role in immigration. They're overseas. They're in these embassies. They're hard on the pulse of a lot of these places. And I think having consular affairs in charge of that function, it's been an historical function. The State Department and consular affairs is far older than DHS, right? And so I would be hesitant to see it, and also I think there's something to be said. There's value in having different hands in the immigration pot because it adds a lot more creativity to fixing some of our immigration solutions. But also, when things go bad, it makes it harder to. So if you had one immigration department, one immigration czar, and anti-immigrant administration comes into power, that's going to be a lot easier to change if it's just one group and one person in charge of immigration. If immigration is spread across the U.S. government, then it becomes a whole different um, challenge. If you were an anti-immigration type person, right? You just couldn't add five immigration czars and then boom, it's done. No, you really have to do the work to really slow down the immigration system, and I think that you want to do that, but also immigration's big. It's complex. It has a lot of different moving parts. And I want, though, other departments to see that, to feel it, and know it. It's good that the IRS knows about immigration. It's good that DOL, irrespective of how they are, have to hear about immigration. And it's good that the State Department has to hear about immigration. Because I think the biggest issue with immigration is just the overall lack of knowledge and understanding about it works with the general populace. And I think that if you just had it under one department, that one department would be able to both move it forward, possibly, but also abuse that system more so. And it would also might take it away from the people even more than it is right now. And so I think having that kind of immigration power dispersed across departments brings it a little bit closer to the American public than if you had just one department dealing with it.
Yeah, it's an interesting insight. It really is an extrapolation of our system of checks and balances. So I appreciate you engaging in that thought experiment with me. Eric, any other questions for Chris? Or
One question, Chris, I had, you mentioned DACA a couple of minutes ago. Um, we're expecting a ruling on DACA from the Supreme Court in June. A lot of businesses and others have come out in support of DACA. What happens if the court rules against the program?
Well, your hope is if they rule against the program that Congress and the White House will, have a come to Jesus moment and say, "Oh my goodness, this immigration stuff, we got to fix it." Um, I think that the administration will try to do something temporary to cover for it. I think that they'll be sued for that, and I think in the process, we'll hopefully buy ourselves some time so that Congress could do something, right? If it came down to people actually being deported, I think then Congress would feel compelled to do something. But I suspect the Biden administration will come out and say, look, we ain't deporting any of these people. And that will then in turn add to a sense of, okay, then don't worry about it. But also, the administration is, I know, working on through the regs right now something to fix DACA even before it gets eliminated. And so it's very possible that if Congress, if the Supreme Court were to come out and say you can't do DACA this way, um, you might get something where the Biden administration immediately issues something that they think meets the concerns of the Supreme Court and let that work through the court system as well.
well, Chris, your insights have been really, really helpful for us here to understand what's going on in the landscape. I want to pass the floor over to you. Is there anything we haven't touched on today that's going on in the current landscape of immigration and employment-based immigration that you think is important for our audience to know about?
No, I think for me, the big issue is that immigration itself is such a complex issue, but it's not a complex issue on a large scale. Our country needs immigrants. Our country was built on immigration. Our country's been built by immigrants. I think that immigration is to the core of who we are as a people, right? I think in a lot of countries, it doesn't matter, like let's say if you're an American and you want to move to Germany or China, in those places you may never be accepted as a German or a Chinese. In America, it doesn't matter if your family's been here for 300 years or 200 years or just came a day ago. You're fundamentally an American at that point. And I think that that's what keeps us a young country, a vibrant country, and a moving country. And I think that that's what makes America the future. And I think that's why this century and the next century will be the American century. But if we don't tend to our garden of immigration, if we don't work hard on these issues, if we don't demand that our leaders sit down and find a solution for these problems, or a strategy at least, not even a solution, just a strategy for dealing with it, they're really contributing to the decline of who we are as a country, and therefore to a decline in our country itself. And so for me, I really just want to stress and hone in on this idea that immigration is not about those people or them or whatever we use to divide ourselves from the immigrants and the businesses that use the immigrants, or adapt to immigration. It really is about who we are as a nation. And as a country, we're not going to be successful, we're not going to thrive, and we're not going to go into the 21st and 22nd and 23rd centuries without being powered by immigrants and immigration and a functioning immigration system, which is something we don't have right now.
Very well said. Well, Chris, just to cap it off here, the conversation, what's coming up on the deck for you in 2023? What's going on with BDV, and where can listeners follow you and find you?
Oh, just you can always find me. Just send us an email, Google bdvsolutions.com, and just send me an email. But that's the best way to follow me. Or look for op-eds. I like to write op-eds too.
I can say as an avid reader of Chris's op-eds that they're definitely worth the read for anyone in the audience.
I third that as well.
Thank you guys so much.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks everyone.